Hello, romance lovers. Today I have a story for you called My First Kiss with the Evil Butler. Don't forget to support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. Thank you for watching. The charming and tall guy turned to the young, charming girl with a smile, asking if she was ready to go out. Their two shining images matched perfectly, giving the impression that they were made for each other. She looked like she couldn't believe what was happening, confused and lost. But in her eyes, you could see that same spark of hope for a miracle. They had both received an invitation to a dinner party, and it was too late to refuse. All that was left was to act. The guy asked if she was ready for tonight. He came up close to her and looked straight into her eyes. He had to kiss her, because she had once asked him about it. The girl was confused by such confident actions of the guy. At that moment, their lips met, and the world around them seemed to disappear. The kiss was full of tenderness and passion. Their hearts began to beat in unison. Time slowed down, leaving them in this single moment, full of a feeling of closeness and tenderness. 3 months ago, at Count Alandis's estate, Baroness Duchamp was a governess, and her patience was being tested. The lady of the house, young Isla, was proving to be completely unmanageable. She was stubborn and unruly, which made it extremely difficult to teach her behavior. The Baroness often got angry, realizing that such a girl would be difficult to handle. This lady did not understand why Count Alandis hired such a young butler, and even assigned him to decide such important issues as his daughter's education. She was an extremely experienced governess, and the servant was ready to fire her right now. The butler continued his dialogue with her about the lady and the prospects of her work here. Baroness Duchamp was a desired governess of many noble families. Her students went out into society prepared and taught. They left behind a pleasant impression. They were ladies of high society. The governess continued her argument with the butler. He gently explained to her that she shouldn't blab about the character and disposition of the lady of this house. She agreed to keep quiet because she was paid quite a large sum for her training. However, she decided to leave this cooperation. The butler did not interfere. When Ayla Alandis appeared in the corridor, her presence attracted the butler's attention. His heart beat faster. She was incredibly charming. Her large eyes radiated joy and lightness, and her look was full of life. Ayla looked like the embodiment of youth and grace, and he could not help but notice her charms. The girl was indignant about the fact that the Count hired for her supposedly the best governess. She said that it was in order to make her an obedient, submissive gray mouse and marry her off to the Duke of Chamel, and not out of the best intentions. The Duke of Chamel is a significant and important figure in the continental trade that Ayla's father was so interested in. He wanted to get involved in it and have influence in this business. Therefore, he needed an alliance with the Duke through marriage. The girl invited the young man to her chambers. He did not want to go and was worried about how it would turn out, because they were constantly being watched. She noticed his distant behavior lately and was very upset. The guy could not afford the sadness of this lovely lady and went after her. He froze in the doorway, afraid to go further into the chambers. The girl started talking about the painting supplies he had sent her the day before. The paints, brushes, and canvases cost a lot of money. And premium quality, too. She doesn't paint at all and doesn't understand why he spends so much. She invited him to sit on the sofa, but he remained standing, refusing the offer. They continued the topic of their once-started conversation about them being adults. Jade asked her to be careful and be wary of close contact with the male sex. He also expressed his concern about her close contact with a male servant. The lady lowered her head, lost in her thoughts. The image of her and Jade's hands intertwined together did not leave her. The butler, noticing her sadness, knelt down and, like a true gentleman, began to calm her down. Assuring her that everything would be fine, Ayla interrupted his words, wrapping her arms around his neck and leaning into his shoulder. Jade froze, not expecting this. His thoughts were jumbled and he didn't know how to react. Ayla felt vulnerable, but at the same time, her heart was at peace next to him. She was genuinely upset that he called himself a male servant. It sounded offensive to her, because she was genuinely happy to see him. Out of the entire palace, the lady could only trust him and a couple of other servants. She also mentioned his workaholism, which all the servants close to her were already talking about. They continued their conversation, laughing and discussing life in the palace. Isla mentioned how Jade continued to argue with her brothers, calling them stupid, and her father was not left out. In response, she noted that it was precisely for such character traits that she liked him. Jade visited Isla's home, where her behavior was discussed. The Earl was disappointed and insisted on finding a governess to make Isla submissive and obsequious, in line with the demands of society and her future husband. Jade found this difficult to accept, but he knew he could not interfere. The butler sighed heavily, realizing the gravity of the task at hand. He felt he had to do this for Ayla, but his heart was heavy that she would have to change herself to please demands he considered wrong. In his search for a governess, he was faced with a choice. Find someone who could truly prepare Ayla for this, or try to set her on his own path that did not require such sacrifice. The butler said that most of the OK governesses were already working for other families. To avoid gossip and discussions, you shouldn't hire a girl who is already working for another family. Ayla's father got mad, and an inkwell flew at Jade. It smashed on the glass behind the guy and drops splashed on his face. The butler was at a loss as to how to approach such a delicate matter. He was always faithful to his duty, but this task seemed too personal and difficult. He felt obliged to help Ayla, but he could not help feeling awkward in front of her. The Count continued his threats, his face twisted in rage, and the room filled with tension. Jade, watching, felt the anger rising inside him. He knew that in this moment his life and Isla's could change forever. Jade listened to her words, feeling an internal struggle. The Countess, despite her position, was just a pawn in someone else's game. He understood that her fate had already been decided, but he himself did not know how to help her. This realization only made it harder for him. Ayla spoke of a future full of happiness and love, but her words only deepened Jade's wounds. He knew that her dreams were doomed to fail, because she could not choose her destiny. His pain was not only from the memories, but also from the fact that he could not prevent her misfortune. Jade and Isla were excitedly discussing palace gossip, exchanging many details about the lives of the aristocracy. When the conversation turned to Marchioness Mellifin, both of them became interested. Isla remembered how she was always the center of attention, and how her actions often became a topic of discussion. Ayla is a smart and ambitious woman who always strives for her goals. She chooses who to spend the evening with and is not afraid of public attention. Having been widowed 2 years ago, she returned to society, causing a great stir with her appearance. The girl asked if Jade had seen her before. He confirmed her guess. She joked that he would definitely fall in love with her. The butler was overcome with anger at such a tactless joke, but he did not show it. A month later, Lady Ayla Loren made her debut. It took place in the main hall of the Ramland Empire Palace. The girl was looking forward to the beginning of a new, wonderful life. She was scared, but the excitement of the new and unknown won over her fear. She felt many eyes on her. Some admired the new lady, and for others, she was just another one. She looked lovely. Her hair fell on her shoulders and emphasized the beauty of her collarbones. The soft pink dress added sophistication and charm. The lady descended the stairs. Each step she took was accompanied by the clicking of her shoes. She bowed before the Emperor and Empress. They were intrigued by the image of the young girl and looked at her with curiosity. The young girl approached everyone and greeted them. She said who she was and where she was from, then bowed and smiled welcomingly. They looked at her with interest or complete indifference. She felt as if she was being assessed as a commodity at an auction. Ayla sighed, looking down at her shoes, her toes painfully pinched. She knew she couldn't stand the pain for long, especially considering she was about to dance with the Duke. She turned to her servant, hoping he could help her with the problem. Lady Ayla was slightly disappointed, but decided to obey her father. She understood that the Duke would be an important guest, and her presence at the ball was necessary. However, the thought that she would like to spend at least a little time in the fresh air did not leave her. Ayla looked around the banquet hall. Everyone was busy with their own business, talking or dancing, and no one noticed her disappearance. She felt almost invisible, as if her presence was irrelevant amidst all the glitter and noise of the celebration. She went out onto the balcony. There was a small place to sit. She decided to give her legs a rest. Then she realized how tired she was. She wanted to drink, but the only drink was champagne, and she was very young. Just as Ayla was lost in her thoughts, music began to play. This meant that the emperor and empress had begun their dance, symbolizing the beginning of the grand ball. Soon, other nobles would join them, and the entire hall would be filled with the sounds of the solemn event. She tried to get up, but the pain was too much, and she realized that she wouldn't be able to walk to the hall. Even if she could, dancing would be impossible, and it would make her and her father look bad. At that moment, a waiter entered the balcony, breaking the silence. His face was hidden behind a carnival mask. On the tray stood a single glass with something resembling champagne. The girl looked at it with interest. She noted that this servant was somehow different from all the others. At first, she refused the drink, but Jade insisted, and she could not resist. The girl was terribly thirsty, and she took only a couple of sips. As soon as she tasted the drink, her face lit up with a smile. It was her favorite apple juice. All this time, she was sitting on her bench. Suddenly, the butler knelt down in front of her. He lifted her skirt and took off her shoes. He began to massage her feet. The girl softened from such pleasure. His hands were firm, and the massage was pleasant. She relaxed completely. Relaxation gave way to sudden tension. The realization that her skirt was lifted and her legs were exposed to a strange man. She immediately blushed and became embarrassed. She also became afraid that someone would see her and then her social life would end. The butler calmed her down, and at that moment the girl recognized Jade's voice. Unable to contain her emotions, she pounced on him with questions about what he was doing there. Jade explained that the Count had asked him to keep an eye on Milady. She was genuinely glad of his presence and felt relieved that someone she trusted was nearby. He carefully applied ointment to her feet and, carefully putting on her shoes, asked her to be careful when walking that evening. The girl, lost in thought, began to talk about how she was perceived in the society of the nobility. She felt like a small and naive girl in their eyes. Jade, smiling, assured her that this was not the case at all. He said that she was charming, and her true strength was hidden in her confidence and personality. He took off his mask, and they continued their conversation about the opinions of high society. The girl was worried that they would not be delighted that her father was trying to sell her at a higher price at this ball. She thought it was ridiculous. Jade assured her that of all the ladies who attended this ball, she was the most beautiful. She made the decision to move towards the exit from the balcony, but the thought that they should not be left alone did not leave her. She felt that at such a moment she had to be careful. Asking the servant to bring champagne, she immediately felt a slight relief, but the anxiety did not disappear. The servant immediately went at her request. She made the decision to move towards the exit from the balcony, but the thought that they should not be left alone did not leave her. She felt that at such a moment she had to be careful. Asking the servant to bring champagne, she immediately felt a slight relief, but the anxiety did not disappear. The servant immediately went at her request. The Marquise's son could not help but notice this charming Milady. She had clearly sunk into his soul, and he was enchanted by her grace and elegance. Each time he looked at her, he became more and more intent, and with each word he felt more and more that he would not be able to forget her. Isla and Jade came out of the balcony. He noticed that she looked tired. She said that he could not bring her juice because it was just an excuse. He wanted to take Milady away from this ball, but he had no idea where or how. He was lost in his thoughts, but was interrupted by a fan tapping his shoulder. He turned around in surprise and was faced with a charming girl. She smiled and called him her partner. He did not understand why he was her partner. The lady was not used to being refused, so she decided that she would call him her toy. She invited him to walk with her. A few days later, Count Alandis's second dream spent hours on the training grounds fighting alongside Jade. They were engaged in a sparring match, with the butler expertly dodging blows. Of course, he was just a servant. Here, another brother, the first son of the Count, enters the field. He sends the youngest to his father because the trading group sent an invoice. In connection with this, the father searches for his son. He dropped the sword on the floor, and the servant picked it up. He carefully put the weapon down, bowed, and left the training hall. The brothers continued their dialogue on the topic of this butler. His identity was suspicious. After all, his family tree was unknown to the end, but he was not just a butler. He was a master at dodging blows. For some reason, Jade also irritated the middle son. As it turned out later, Ayla had brought this boy from the street about 10 years ago. The brothers also discussed the fact that many families were interested in Ayla. An invitation from the Duke of Chamel's family also arrived. That same evening, Isla overindulged in alcohol. She smelled quite strongly of alcohol. The Duke tried to get her drunk. Her two faithful servants asked Jade to escort the lady to the bed. He was told to hold her head because she might vomit. The butler picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. When she opened her eyes, he asked her if she was okay. She said she had no idea how much she had drunk or what because there had been a lot of alcohol. She didn't understand why everyone was so eager to get her drunk, especially that Duke. She asked him not to leave. The alcohol had relaxed the lady enough for her to confess her feelings to Jade. She said she liked him because he had an elegance that the nobles lacked. Then she quoted the law from the previous evening. Either you drink or you kiss the person sitting next to you. It was called the kissing game. Ayla mentioned that the Duke had been sitting next to her all evening. She couldn't give her first kiss to some old man, so she drank every time. In protest, the Duke kissed the lady sitting opposite him. They kissed for quite a while. On the way home, she nearly fell over 3 times from the amount of alcohol in her. She asked Jade if she had done everything right, because that was the only thing she could do. She also told him that in order to live the way she wanted, she would have to become someone other than what she had dreamed of. And at that moment, she fell asleep. Jade was left in his own thoughts. He couldn't protect her, but he couldn't be with her either. He had only positive feelings for her. And while the lady was asleep, he leaned over to kiss her. But another maid suddenly entered the room. He quickly pulled away from her and pretended that nothing had happened. The girl asked if everything was okay with Milady. She had a teapot and a cup of tea on her tray. She looked concerned about Ayla's condition. She also expressed gratitude to Jade for helping the girl. The guy turned around and walked away. Marquise Melofina asked Jade where he was going. They were having a great time. She was chatting over a glass of wine and a cigar. She asked him why he didn't want to work for her. After all, working with her was the dream of every nobleman. The servant politely declined such a generous offer. I got tired of persuading him. So she simply passed a note through him to the Count. He became interested in why she was helping him. The Marquis did not need much persuasion, and she told him her conclusions and observations. Everyone wants to take part in this auction because it is a big and significant event, especially since it is organized by the Duke himself. In exchange for her youth and purity, Lady Ela will receive all the riches that can provide her with a golden life, full of luxury and privileges. But despite this, her heart remains doubtful. Finally, the Marquise asked him to massage her shoulders. As soon as he approached, she, unexpectedly for the servant, pulled him to her. She looked into his calm eyes. He looked rough and cold, but his eyes were filled with sadness. She said that he reminded her of her lover, who had died long ago at the hands of the nobility. His name was Malik. A chill ran through Jade's body. He shuddered when he heard the name. Although it was a common name, only one came to mind, a name he knew. Viscount Malik Joseph Astrid. That was his father. In that moment, all his confidence was shaken, and a storm of memories and feelings arose in his soul that he tried to hide. That same day, Isla called Jade to her chambers and asked him directly why he was so cold and formal with her. He replied that she had already debuted, and he could no longer help her. However, in his mind, the boy returned to the day he was saved, and the memories of her care and kindness always remained with him, although he could not allow himself to be close to her. He was wounded and weak, and it seemed that death was near. However, it was Lady Isla who saved him from death. After 8 years, his health had improved significantly. It was as if he had become a different person, strong, determined, and ready for new challenges, although the memories of that time always remained with him. He and Ayla had discussed this once. He had wondered how it had all come together and why he had ended up in this position. He had begun to notice changes in himself as he began to notice the mistakes of past butlers, feeling that their mistakes were not being repeated because of his attentiveness. When the incident with the Baroness happened, he finally saw her. His feelings, despite everything, did not fade, and he realized how much he was attracted to her. The girl, sensing the moment, gave him a birthday present. She mentioned that this gift was bought a year ago, but somehow there was no chance to give it to him before. The fact that she kept it for so long only added significance to this moment. The boy opened the small box in anticipation. Inside was a scarf, silver in color, with a delicate and sophisticated pattern. It was incredibly beautiful, with subtle details that made it almost magical. The fabric was light and silky, as if it was created specifically to emphasize his elegance. The girl asked to put the scarf on him, and despite his resistance, she took the initiative. She carefully tied a beautiful bow and said with a smile that it perfectly matched his eye color. Martin asked in surprise why silver. She explained that sometimes he had a silver rim around his pupil, which gave his eyes a special shade. A few moments later, she began talking about her visit to Lady Kareen's today. They discussed the girl's favorite poem, and Ayla spoke enthusiastically about how the lines of this poem resonated with her inner world. However, Lady Kareen's shamed her for reading all the time and knowing nothing but books, not realizing that this was her way of hiding from reality. The young man she had seen on the day of her debut came to the rescue. They had a long talk about poetry, and she found the conversation unusual and refreshing. He introduced himself as Martin Giannino, and Isla liked that he didn't know about the oddities of the local nobility. His sincerity and ease made him an interesting conversationalist, and she felt that this conversation could be the beginning of something more. The butler explained a little about the Giannino family. Martin was the second son to enter society after the tragic death of his older brother. This change in the family had a profound effect on his life, and Martin was now forced to not only assume the role of heir, but also take responsibility for the future of his family. If Lady Isla and Martin fall in love, it will be the most beneficial union for everyone. Their union will bring political and social benefits, strengthening the positions of both families. But everything was not so simple. There are too many barriers between them, from obligations to their own ambitions. However, if the feelings are true, then their union will be ideal, and perhaps this will be the decisive factor for their future. However, that was not all the girl wanted to tell. There was a similar evening coming up soon, and there would be a kissing game. She planned to take Martin next to her so that when she had the chance to kiss him, she would do it. This kiss would tell the Duke everything, and she would also be able to find out about Martin's feelings for her. This was her chance to figure out her feelings and how things really were between them, but she was afraid to take the risk. However, the young lady did not know how to kiss at all, and realizing the importance of the moment, she asked Jade to teach her. She understood that if the Duke really sent a proposal to her father, she would not be able to avoid marrying this old man. And although she was ashamed to ask for such a thing, her future depended on how much she could manipulate the Marquise's feelings to avoid this fate. What she really didn't want was to use her power to manipulate the feelings of others. But her goal was clear. She had to make the Marquis fall in love with her kiss. And the only one who could teach her this art was Jade. Despite all the contradictions, she understood that she couldn't do it without his help, and this thought tormented her. He agreed without saying a word and simply turned to leave. When he reached the Marquise, he poured himself a full glass of wine, trying to drown out his thoughts. There, amidst the conversations and carefree words, he learned how the Allendice family had destroyed him. This revelation was the final blow to his soul, and he realized that everything he had sought to achieve was connected to revenge for past wrongs that could never be forgotten. When Jade confronted Malik, he learned something he didn't want to know. He learned that it was Ayla's family that had ruined his life, and this realization hurt him deeply. Everything he had experienced was the result of those events that had left an indelible mark on his soul. Malik was not just a part of his past, but a symbol of the pain that had led him to destruction and revenge. In the middle of the night, a scream rang out in the palace, waking Ayla from her sleep. She learned that Jade had wounded her brother, for which he had been beaten half to death and thrown into prison. Ayla's heart sank with horror and pain. Unable to wait any longer, she rushed to the main building, trying to find a way to help Jade despite everything that had happened. She rushed into the main building in her nightgown, completely forgetting about propriety. There she found two brothers playing cards, as if not noticing her hasty entrance. Embarrassed, she stopped at the threshold, aware of how ridiculous she looked, but at the same time, her anxiety and worry did not disappear. She expressed concern when she noticed that her middle brother had sprained his wrist. Lady Esla wondered where her servant was, for he was supposed to bring her the thing she was expecting. Her eyes betrayed her anxiety, but she tried to remain calm, although she felt inside that something was wrong. The younger brother resisted and did not understand why there was such a rush. But the elder, seeing the seriousness of the situation, said that since it was urgent, then let her go, and gave her the key card. Lady Ayla was delighted and hurried, without wasting time, heading to where her help could have an impact. In the dark dungeon, she came across Jade's body. It was covered in bruises, scratches, and wounds, evidence of what he had been through. Her heart ached at the sight of his suffering, and she could hardly hold back her tears. In her eyes, he looked like a man who had not been spared by life, and she could not believe that he had been tortured so cruelly. She brought some water and some healing ointment with her. After she had somehow stirred Jade up, she carefully gave him some water, trying to be as gentle as possible so as not to cause him any more pain. Then she began to treat his wounds, her hands shaking with worry, but she tried not to show her worry, doing everything she could to help him. Jade closed his eyes and heard her every other time. His thoughts were foggy, and his body was poisoned by pain. The only thing he asked was to let him die, to stop this torment. Lady Ayla, despite his desperate words, tried to console him, saying that this suffering was temporary and that everything would definitely pass. But her words sounded like an echo in his mind, and he was not sure that he could survive it. He asked her to give him the ointment and leave, adding coldly that her kind had no place in such a place. Lady Ayla tried to insist on her help, but he firmly rejected her, not allowing her to come closer. His words were full of alienation, and despite her desire to help, he remained adamant, as if their connection no longer mattered. Jade was left alone with his thoughts, lost in his memories. He remembered how he had sworn to her, how he had promised to protect her. But now he was becoming the man who was ruining her life. Avenging his father was a matter of honor for him, and although he knew that his revenge would bring her pain, he could not stop. After all, they had once ruined his life, and now it was his turn to pay for all the past grievances. Jade Lucius Astrid, the name that would cause her pain. Everything she experienced was tied to that name, to who he was and what he meant to her. He would have to let go of his old life, but only then, perhaps, would she be able to let go of him. And knowing all this, he allowed himself to touch her one day, as something fragile, but so desirable. Milady learned that Jade had a maid named Milla. Jade had once helped her through a difficult time, and now Milla was head over heels in love with him. This news turned everything inside Ayla upside down. She felt her heart squeeze with jealousy and pain, because now someone else was with him. It seemed that she could not forgive herself for not realizing this sooner. There was a knock at the door, and Jade walked in. He looked as if nothing had happened, as if his wounds and worries did not concern him. His calm face and confident gait contrasted with the tension that hung in the air. Lady Ayla noticed how he tried to hide his pain, but inside she was clenching with anxiety. The lady was concerned about his condition. Her thoughts were occupied with his wounds, how he was feeling, and whether he was all right. Jade answered her questions calmly, trying not to show how hard it was for him. She was extremely worried, but he seemed calm and focused. At one point, he asked if she was going to the party. Lady Ayla confirmed his guess, although she was unsure of what to do next. Jade came to renew her request for the first kiss. He came closer and closer to her, and each step he took made her heart beat faster. Lady Ayla was confused, not understanding what she should do, but she did not resist. Everything that was happening seemed exciting and frightening at the same time, and she felt her feelings getting the better of her. They kissed, and Lady Ayla was extremely embarrassed, not even closing her eyes in surprise. Just as the kiss began to bring pleasure, a maid knocked on the door. She announced that the carriage was ready, breaking the moment, and Ayla felt her emotions instantly mixed, from embarrassment to tension. Jade gave her 3 items without explaining their meaning, only saying that they might be useful. After that, he turned and walked away, leaving a cold feeling behind him. His behavior was mysterious, and his departure left Ayla with a feeling of uncertainty, as if something important was being kept from her. A few moments later, Lady Ayla came down to the carriage. The butler gave her his hand, and she gracefully stepped into the carriage. Her middle brother was also in her company, and the eldest remained at home, as he had drunk too much. In this slightly unusual company, they went to the ball, hoping that everything would work out for the best, despite the unexpected circumstances. When they arrived at the ball, they were told their seats. It turned out to be the table of influential people, which slightly surprised Ayla. She felt out of place among such people, and as soon as she caught the gaze of the Marquise, her bad state worsened. Feeling dizzy, she asked to be moved closer to the balcony or the restroom so that she could at least recover a little and catch her breath. Lady Ayla hurried away, lost in her thoughts. She began to analyze everything that had happened to her. Jade, the Duke, the points. Memories intertwined in her head, and she was so carried away that she stumbled and fell right into the arms of her lover. He gently offered her to take the empty seat next to him, adding that she could always count on his support. She sat next to him, unable to say a word. There were too many people around, and every move she made seemed to be given away, even if she was trying to be inconspicuous. Of course, he was the future heir to the family, and his presence attracted the attention of everyone around him. Suddenly, the Duke of Chamel approached their table, accompanied by the Marquise. He introduced the girls to each other with a smile, emphasizing that this was an important acquaintance for both parties. The atmosphere at the table changed, and the conversation became more tense, as if something important depended on this acquaintance. Martin complimented the Marquis, expressing his admiration. Then he invited him to join them at their table, emphasizing that it was a great honor for them to share this dinner. Over drinks and food, they discussed the affairs of Count Alandis, exchanging many details concerning trade and possible alliances. Here, Martin remembered the famous game, Drink or Kiss. The rules were very simple. Either drink or kiss. However, the more rules there were, the more losers there would be, and the more difficult the game became. But at this point, perhaps the game no longer mattered to him. He looked at Lady Ayla, and looking her straight in the eye, said that he had drunk enough and did not want to continue. He valued her opinion, and he was waiting for a reaction. Lady Isla, in turn, did not believe that her plan could work. Her doubts were deep, and she could not shake the feeling that all this was just a waste of time. A few moments later, amidst the chatter, he held her eye contact and kissed her. Perhaps he was thinking about another girl, not her, but she was thinking about something else at that moment. Everything that was happening seemed simultaneously real and alien, like something that should not happen. Meanwhile, they were approaching the palace. The lady felt cold, and noticing something lying under her feet, she discovered a basket. It contained a blanket and a bottle of apple juice, which immediately alleviated her discomfort. The butler, standing at the window, was waiting for her to appear, ready to help. Suddenly, the father returned from hunting, his rage visible to the naked eye. He entered the room with such force that everyone fell silent. Duke Chamel, he announced, would never again lend his ships for trade, which put the family in an even more difficult situation. The brothers stood there in shock, not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, a cup flew at them, breaking into pieces, and one of the shards cut the hand of one of the brothers. He groaned in pain, but his eyes were still full of bewilderment and confusion, unable to comprehend what had just happened. During the shouting match, it became clear that the Duke was withdrawing all his investments and would no longer propose marriage to Isla. His decision was final, and this blow came as a real shock to the family. But even more shocking was the fact that Isla, without embarrassment, kissed another man in front of everyone, demonstrating her determination and rejection of previous commitments. The eldest brother offered to bring Ayla here, and while he was bringing her, the father, unable to contain himself, took out his rage on the middle son. His words were full of anger, and each blow was like a lightning strike, leaving marks on the boy's body. The eldest son remained silent, knowing that his anger could not be stopped. The enraged father asked his daughter what she was doing at the ball. She replied that she was only socializing with the nobles and nothing more. However, his anger did not subside, and, shouting at her, he uttered words that sent shivers down her spine. There was such rage in his voice that it seemed it could engulf the entire hall. He wanted to know why she never played the game Drink or Kiss with the Duke. The girl, unable to restrain herself, shouted that it was he himself who allowed her to do so, and added that she believed that she would find a man her own age with whom she could build a real family. The father, shocked by her impudence, removed his belt buckle, preparing to punish her for her impudence. There was a thud and a whistle of air from them as the little girl, with no attempt to hide her determination, declared that she would receive a real proposal of marriage. She added that she would leave this house, not intending to endure humiliation any longer and live by someone else's rules. Her words sounded like a promise, and there was so much confidence in them that even those around her fell silent. He swung at the girl again, but at that moment there was a knock on the door. It was the butler who had been sought for so long. He entered holding a newspaper and, despite the tension in the air, handed it to the Count, who seemed to calm down a little after looking at the contents. The cover featured the Alandis family, whose status and influence had long attracted attention. The article detailed their trade with the Eastern continent, noting that the Emperor had shown great interest in the matter, which could lead to new strategic alliances. Jade was so angry that he didn't hide his anger and ordered the butler to bring a cigar and throw Isla into the basement. His words sounded like a sentence, and the butler, without asking unnecessary questions, carried out the instructions without delay, despite his inner doubts. The butler led the girl to the best room in the basement, trying to create at least some semblance of comfort. He asked her to wait a little while he brought water and medicine. His eyes betrayed his concern, but he hid it so as not to appear weak in front of her. 2 hours later, he returned to find Lady Ayla fast asleep. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he wrapped her in a blanket and began to treat her wounds. Every gesture was full of care and tenderness, despite all the pain they had both endured. Different thoughts were running through his head. He was ready to take revenge on Ayla's father right now for everything he had done to her. If he did that, he could run away with Ayla and maybe they would be free. But he knew that such a step would bring even more troubles upon them, and their freedom would be short-lived anyway. Jade remembered the moment when they were together in the garden. The girl had hurt her arm and the pain was intense, but she was forbidden to cry. He saw her restraint and, sensing her suffering, he quietly said that next to him she could cry as much as she wanted. These were those rare moments when she could be real without hiding her feelings. He looked at her and knew that she could never be happy with a man like him. There was determination in his eyes. He knew that the only way to free her was to destroy this worthless family once and for all, so that she could find her own way to freedom. The day before, he had overheard the conversation between the lady and the Count. She had said that she would marry Martin Giannino, that from now on her heart belonged to another. These words had awakened in him a sense of loss, but the only thing he wanted was for her to live on, despite everything, and to be happy. While the lady was sleeping, Jade finally dared to kiss her. Suddenly she woke up, and his shock was hard to describe. He tried to justify himself, but her eyes did not express anger, only determination. She did not listen to him, wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him herself, as if all words were superfluous. Within moments, passion had taken hold of them. The guy began to move lower, covering her body with kisses, and wanting to cross the line, he was ready to do so. However, when he touched Ayla's wound, he felt her pain. The former tenderness disappeared, giving way to tension and awkwardness. Jade wondered why she didn't say that she was hurt. She remembered how silent he was when he was hurt, and felt a strange connection between their silences. The butler tried to explain that they were different, but she didn't listen. She wondered why he was silent, although it probably wouldn't have changed anything. Suddenly, there was a knock on the basement door. It was the maid, who looked surprised when she noticed the butler. She had not expected him to be with her, and immediately sensed that something was wrong. A look of confusion flashed in her eyes, but she said nothing, waiting for an explanation. She reported that the Count was looking for Lady Ayla. Giannino sent a letter of invitation, written in Martin Giannino's handwriting. Jade, seeing this, congratulated Milady on the fulfillment of her wish, realizing that now everything had become even more confusing and unclear for herself. A few minutes later, the butler stood in the Count's office. The Count was pondering the wealth of the Giannino family, weighing the risks and benefits. He firmly told the butler to send Martin an answer to the letter, indicating that it was time to move on and decide what to do with this alliance. Jade came to Marquise and she mentioned his father's death. He hadn't been able to understand why she wanted to help him before. She told him that this was her second chance to save him, to right the wrongs of the past. Astrid took a moment to think, trying to process her words. Ayla and Martini's wedding was to take place in a few days. After all, at the end of the month, the Count and Marquise trading party would be heading to the Eastern continent. Her father very rudely explained to his daughter that her marriage was just a deal. If she behaved badly, everyone dear to her would suffer. 4 days later, Martin came with the long-awaited invitation to marry her. Lady Isla accepted it with restraint, but there was absolutely nothing inside. Not a drop of joy, no excitement, no happiness. She felt only emptiness, as if her heart was closed to these feelings that should have filled her at that moment. The long-awaited wedding day arrived, attracting the attention of all high society. Among the guests, the Marquise Melifina and the Grand Duke Salzren stood out, their presence emphasizing the importance of the event. The nobles were animatedly discussing what had happened. Their opinions differed, but they were all united by one thing: sincere shock at such a rapid development of events. Some saw it as a political calculation, others, sincere feelings, but no one remained indifferent. Lady Isla looked gorgeous, as if she had stepped out of an old fairy tale. Every element of her outfit emphasized her sophistication and grace. It was the wedding of her dreams. Everything seemed perfect. However, her eyes reflected sadness. While the guests were having fun, she quietly asked to go outside for some fresh air. Running out onto the soft grass, still damp from the evening dew, she stopped far away from the noisy celebration and the bustle of the wedding. Her breathing was intermittent, as if something was squeezing her chest. Sitting down on the ground, she burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. It seemed to her that she was standing on the very edge of a cliff, where one wrong step could destroy everything. Jade's voice came from behind her, slightly unsteady. It was clear he had been drinking a bit. Lady Isla smiled softly and assured him that she would take care of him if necessary. She extended her hand as if to adjust something near his ear. Jade jerked his hand away, afraid that someone might misinterpret her gesture. Heavy thoughts began to repeat in her head, like an endless carousel. She had to be the perfect wife, had no right to make mistakes, could not show her true self. She was no longer a child, and if she failed, her father would punish her. These tormenting thoughts fell upon her at once, like a powerful wave that overwhelmed her until she lost her strength. A sharp, sudden pain shot through her body, causing her to double over and begin to fall. Jade, who was nearby, instantly caught her, holding her in his strong arms. He felt her skin burning hot and realized that she had a fever. He wanted to call the maid, but he noticed that she was calmer when he was near and decided not to leave. He looked at her for a long time. He examined her facial features, admired the depth of her blue eyes, the curls of her hair, inhaled the scent of her perfume. And then the forgotten passion flared up. He greedily bit into her lips as if he was trying to take something with him. The lady gave in to her, and Jade greedily enjoyed the girl in his arms. Suddenly, her father's words came to mind. If she wasn't perfect, she would let everyone down. They hit her like a bucket of cold water in the morning. She pulled away from Jade and froze. Then she timidly suggested that he become a butler in her new home so that they wouldn't be separated. They had grown up together. Jade's next conclusions shocked her. In a cold and indifferent tone, he asked if he would be her lover. Otherwise, why would he be a butler? There were enough servants in that house. He spoke as if they were seeing each other for the last time. The lady was stunned by surprise and did not know what to say. He kept muttering under his breath that they had to live happily and that she could hate someone with all her heart. He was saying goodbye to her, and she understood it, but she really didn't want to. She was terribly angry at this behavior. Why was he leaving? He extended his hand to help her up, but she abruptly intercepted it and began to scream at him from anger and pain. She did not understand why she was still a child in his eyes. After all, she was already 18 years old and she was getting married. It seemed that Ayla did not know or understand anything at all. However, she knew one thing for sure: that if he left, he would never come back. In the rain, it was impossible to see the tears running down her face and down her chin. The tears merged with the raindrops. She hurried into the building and screamed that she was a pathetic idiot and had screwed up again. From the second-floor balcony, a dark male silhouette with a glass of red wine in his hand watched the spectacle. The only conclusion he made was that he was interested. Finally, the morning after the wedding came. Ayla thought it was a bad dream. It could have been a nightmare, if not for the cough. It reminded her of the reality of what was happening. Despite feeling unwell, Ayla looked beautiful. Her fiancé called her. A few minutes later, she was heading towards the palace entrance. In front of the doors, the groom took her arm and they would enter as a couple. The lady knew that as soon as the door opened, she would officially become a bride. Ayla paused in front of the door. She was very scared, but she crossed the threshold and went on. The crowd greeted them with their eyes. Now she became Ayla Janino. Although the status of a bride was assigned to her, it was not for long. 7 years later, she was Marquise Isla Lauren Giannino. She was a status and very beautiful lady. Her husband had a high place in society and was popular. She settled down well in society. She burst into the room where her husband was having fun with some young lady. The guards couldn't stop her. The Marquis was furious with such behavior. His wife burst into his chambers without knocking, and she caught him cheating. Ayla reacted more calmly to this scene than everyone expected. She had a visualization crystal in her hands, which recorded a video of his betrayal. Thus began the story of Giannino's divorce. Ayla ran out of the room as fast as she could. The servants were unable to catch her, and her now ex-husband only caught up with her at the carriage when she was sitting in it. The lady said that their next meeting place was the courtroom. Martin demanded the crystal back. The girl didn't have it with her. She thought that he would want to search her again, as he had done once before. 7 years ago, there was a similar situation. He thought she stole something when her family went bankrupt. Then he yelled at her and stripped her with all the servants. It was a public disgrace in front of his subordinates. Now she didn't wait and unbuttoned her blouse herself. Martin was angry with her, and the servants were confused and embarrassed. She didn't understand what he didn't like and pulled her clothes down even lower. Maybe he thought she hid them even lower? Martin was furious with this behavior. His wife was exposing herself to everyone. After the wedding, he became the savior of the Alandis family. He stabilized the business and made a good name. And she, allegedly, used him to rehabilitate the name of her family. He was a victim in the eyes of others and thus earned himself recognition and favor. Ayla got tired of discussing the matter and went to the Empress. All she asked for was an official divorce. Martin wondered where she would go and what she would do if the divorce was approved. She had nothing. The Kingdom of Ramlin declared a war that lasted 3 years. And 2 years ago, it conquered new territory, which was the beginning of the great empire of Ramland. Grand Duke Astrid and Salzrin were on the front lines. A certain trade guild was responsible for all supplies to the front. And behind the decisions of this guild stood the Marchioness of Milofina. Everyone in the empire knew about her influence during the war, and in general knew about the breadth of her influence throughout the empire. The Marchioness mentioned that she needed gifts for the new duke from the north. The maids began to gossip about what kind of duke Astrid was. They mentioned his coldness and cruelty on the battlefield. Ayla felt a chill run through her body. She would never forget his name. He had destroyed her entire family, and she still felt guilty that her family had subjected him to such terrible suffering for 10 years. The Empress asked for her evening dress, and Ayla left. The girls stayed to gossip about Ayla and her past with the Duke. The Empress quickly stopped the gossip because Ayla could hear. The topic was unpleasant for her. As soon as the girl walked out the door, she sat up and remembered with horror the day of her father's trial. That day, he was the most pathetic and helpless person she had ever seen in her entire life. The trial was supposed to be about the corruption of the Alandis family, but Astrid's name came up and the meeting changed the subject. Behind his back, Count Alandis sold people to the eastern continent. The Count earned several hundred for each slave. His business was successful and flourished until one of the slaves escaped and told. When Jade's father learned of this, the Count fled. He had betrayed his ally. And of course, Astrid bore the full punishment for what she had done. After this, there was a trial of Viscount Astrid where he was executed. He was stripped of his title and everyone in his estate was dead. Only one son remained. He managed to escape and survive. He demanded a retrial after 10 years. The court decided to execute Ayla's father and strip the brothers of their titles. All charges against the Viscount were dropped and his title was returned to him. At this point, Ayla realized that the luxurious life she had enjoyed was due to the deaths of others. From the crowd came the cries of others about how one could be such a liar, how an aristocrat could commit such a terrible crime. Even animals wouldn't do that. Ayla heard all these cries that covered her head. Before the execution, Father told Ayla that it was Jade who did it, that he was the one who gave the evidence to Astrid's family. Father didn't know that Jade was Astrid. The maid continued to gossip about the feud between Ayla's family and the Duke. This matter caused a stir among everyone and was still on everyone's lips. Ayla was right behind the door and heard everything. Celine, Ayla's friend and former maid, asked to stop these conversations immediately. After all, they could be heard. The Empress agreed with what was said. That evening, Selena spoke to Ayla. She asked her where she would go since she would not return to her husband. Selena's husband is a lawyer who is helping Ayla with her divorce. She once again thanked the girl and her husband for their help in this matter. Celine wondered if Isla would be okay with the new judge, since it was Astrid. She wondered about that, but she didn't have time to put off the divorce for a year until the judge stepped down. Isla had already made her decision and wasn't going to put off the divorce any longer. A carriage was waiting for Ayla in the backyard. It was very opportune and timely. The coachman asked about the destination. Ayla shouted the address and ran into the carriage. She smelled something very sweet, like apple trees in bloom. She remembered her spring with Jade and their first kiss in the garden. And now she doesn't even know if he's alive. The memories of him washed over her and she wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Ayla looked under the carriage seat. There was a basket with a blanket and apple juice. She smiled at the gift. She loved apple juice. Meanwhile, they had already arrived outside. Madame asked if there was always a blanket and juice in the carriages. The coachman evaded the answer, smiled sweetly, and went back. She did not understand the reason for his silence. Ayla stood outside. She didn't understand what was going on. The coachman seemed strange to her, but she was so tired of the recent events that she decided to leave these thoughts for later. So she knocked lightly on the door and went into the dark bakery. Meanwhile, the coachman reported to Jade about Ailu's condition. He said that he had noticed nothing unusual except a slight pallor. He told her that she had inquired about the basket and said that she had not touched the apple juice. She did not seem at all naive and stupid to him. Jade was pleased with the coachman's words, and he smiled at the words the coachman said. But then the servant became confused and wary. This is him, the Duke, the killing machine. He was created as if in a laboratory. Astrid did not flinch when his name and honor were returned to him. The emperor granted him the title again and gifted him lands in the north. He got all the way to the capital to become a judge, and the first thing he does is give the Marquise apple juice and a blanket. Although the blanket is a good gift, the coachman thought that it was done for revenge. After all, the lady was from the Alandis family, and apparently the Duke wanted to get rid of all members of the family, including Ayla. He felt sad for her because this lady looked very charming and beautiful. In any case, he had nothing more to say and he left. And even if he had, he couldn't. He had no right to contradict or ask anything of the gentleman. Ayla went inside the bakery and saw Marie, her former maid. Marie was happy to see her former mistress. They had spent a lot of time together and had become really close friends. She immediately offered her hazelnut muffins, but the lady very nicely declined the evening snack. Ayla was glad to have the opportunity to talk to Marie. During the warm conversation, they remembered Greta, the maid who was always there. The memories of the past caused the girls to laugh heartily, filling the room with a cozy atmosphere. When the Alandis family lost all their property, Ayla gathered the girls and handed them an envelope. It contained the title to a small shop. The maids opened a small bakery on this street. They remodeled the second floor so that the lady could come there when needed. Afterwards, Greta married the owner of the grocery store, moved in with him, and left the house. The shop turned out to be quite cozy and always smelled deliciously of fresh-baked goods. Greta handed the lady a blanket and a small envelope with a seal decorated with the letter A. Upon receiving it, Ayla could not hide her joy. A soft smile lit up her face and her eyes shone brighter, as if the sun's warmth was reflected in them. The next day, Ayla went to the tea house to meet her lawyer. She was a little late, but they were already waiting for her with a cup of exquisite tea, which made the wait easier. The conversation began with the key details of her upcoming divorce, which promised to be a difficult but important step. A fresh piece of bread, Marie and Greta, who will always come to her aid and take care of her with all the human warmth. And the memories of the man who gave her brushes and paints, which flooded her. She will soon be freed from the terrible shackles of marriage and everything will be better. The girl sat down on a chair opposite the white canvas, behind which there was a window. The sensations were pleasant and already familiar to her. She immersed herself in the carefree time she spends with herself. It was finally time to rest. She immersed herself in the creative process. The next day, Ayla came to the tea house to see her lawyer. She was a little late, but they were waiting for her over a cup of excellent tea, and the time passed unnoticed. They began to talk about Ayla's upcoming divorce. They moved on to discussing the case. The lawyer specified where the crystal was, which was the main evidence of the Marquis's guilt. Ayla shared her memories, how she fled from the palace, and how at the most necessary moment she was met by a coachman with a ready carriage, which seemed like a real miracle. Ayla suddenly realized that the coachman who had brought her to the meeting was the same one who had served in the royal castle. This made her wary, because everything seemed too perfect. She had never considered herself so lucky. The lawyer, noticing her thoughtfulness, gently asked what was troubling her thoughts. She wondered why they were helping her. So she asked. They were helping her because she was Seleni's friend and just a good person. Then they continued discussing the case. Ayla needed witnesses. She had 2 maids who could become witnesses, but they were from the lower classes, and usually such people are bribed. She began to think about who she could ask, and a couple of options came to mind. The lawyer assured Ayla that the chances of getting a divorce were almost 100%, and she could rest easy. Inspired by these words, the lady ended the conversation and headed home to a cozy bakery, where a short respite from all the worries awaited her. There was a crowd of people outside the bakery. There was a crash inside, as if someone had fallen. She ran in and saw a pregnant Greta on the floor. She was afraid for her friend and did not understand what was happening. Her brother was standing at the threshold. She was angry with him for allowing himself to raise his hand against her friends. He did not understand why she was angry. After all, he had simply hit commoners. For him, this was nothing unusual. He recalled with fury how she had remained cold and uncaring the day their older brother had died. She had not even flinched, he said, as if the death of a family member meant nothing to her. Ayla remained silent, but inside she was seething. It was not only the words that hurt her, but the injustice of the accusation. Ayla smiled bitterly as she listened to his words. She remembered how that beloved brother had been mired in debt and died because of his mistakes. This man who was now shouting at her had not even bothered to come to his funeral. His hypocrisy was unbearable, and she wanted to respond, but the words were stuck in her throat. The brother came to talk about Ayla's upcoming divorce. The girl assumed that her husband had sent her brother to talk about the divorce and persuade her not to do it. The scandal was very disadvantageous for Martin and very untimely. The brother got so angry that he started to destroy everything around him. Ayla said that he knew nothing about her life as a marchioness. She had never lived a day in this luxurious life, and she was taking back her legal right to divorce. After that, Ayla turned around and went into the bakery, closing the door behind her. He followed her and claimed that she had nowhere to go. No one would help her, and he would never do it. Ayla sighed and asked him not to mention her anymore, as he had for the past 7 years. Her brother's anger gave way to gentle persuasion, but Ayla still denied it. At one point, Isla's brother started talking about money and suggested that Martin had promised him a share in his business if he would talk her out of a divorce. She was right, and Martin became even more furious with her for her propheticness. The next moment, he pressed the girl against the wall and demanded to give the crystal the good way. He didn't care about Ayla if she was found dead at night like her older brother. He needed the crystal, and then money from the Marquise. He grabbed her purse and threw it on the floor. The contents scattered in all directions, but there was no crystal. Ayla started screaming at her brother out of anger. Then he pressed her against the wall harder, covering her mouth with his hand. And he saw a pendant on her neck. It was the crystal. But then some unknown person entered the bakery. His clothes looked rich, luxurious, obviously expensive. The brother tried to stop him and throw him out, saying that he was talking to his sister and that the place was not open for visitors yet. The young man did not stop and hit him again. As he lay on the floor of the bakery, Ayla thanked the stranger for helping her save herself. Ayla wondered who this man was. When she asked him, he simply remained silent. Meanwhile, her brother stood up and swung the sharp part of the crystal at the stranger. He did not lose his composure and kicked the gem out of his hands. As a result, the brother fell to his knees, and the crystal shattered into pieces against the wall. Ayla gasped and froze with her mouth open. and horror was written on her face. She looked stunned and confused. It was unclear what to do next, because her main evidence had just been barbarically destroyed. Ayla sat on the floor, clutching the shattered crystal in her shaking hands. Tears streamed down her face. Her heart was breaking with pain and despair. Her brother's words echoed in her head. He had gone, leaving her alone in the ruins of her hopes. His last words were to forget about her divorce from Martin. The stranger's assistant entered the room with two girls who, pushing their way through the crowd, shouting and elbowing loudly, hurried to Ayla. They were clearly alarmed and immediately began asking if she was okay. Suddenly, one of them noticed the shattered crystal and screamed, accusing the stranger of breaking it. The lady asked the girls to calm down and thanked him for helping her escape from her brother. She remembered and mentioned that she had to repay him for his help. However, her situation was not the best, and she could not afford it. She asked for the stranger's name so that she could repay him someday, but he did not even listen to it. He just turned around abruptly and walked away. Ayla felt her heart begin to beat faster as she looked at the stranger. She could not understand what exactly it was about his action that touched her so much. He was not like all those around her, and despite her dissimilarity, she felt an extraordinary gratitude towards him. Secretary John offered Isla and Marie an alternative solution. He explained that his master, having learned of the value of the stone, was ready to compensate for the damage by offering to create a new stone, no less unique and beautiful than the one that was destroyed. Isla thought about it, but understood that although this would not restore the loss, it would at least compensate for it. Ayla looked at the note with bewilderment. There were no questions on her part, only slight anxiety. She carefully folded the paper without opening it and hid it in her pocket. It all seemed strange, but her curiosity and desire to understand what was happening prevailed. Tomorrow she definitely had to go. Ayla looked at the piece of paper in her hands with interest. And while her attention was focused on the contents of the note, John handed them a whole bag, which contained a large sum of money. The girl was shocked, and the secretary took advantage of their shock and ran away. She thought that she could catch up with him, but they had already disappeared around the corner. As she stood on the street looking for her savior, a stranger in a dark cloak approached her. He called her by name, and she could not understand how he knew about her. The mysterious guest asked about her paintings. She thought for a long time, and the man in the cloak panicked that there was no answer for a long time. The young man hesitated a little, but then confessed that he was an artist, and his name was Leonardo. He said that he had heard about her talent and could not pass by the opportunity to meet her without attention. Ayla was surprised that he had come from the capital just to see her work. Ayla was taken aback by his words. He admitted that he was a fan of hers, and she couldn't believe it. It turned out that he found out about her from a person who sent letters with the initial A, which only added to the mystery of the whole situation. He once offered her a huge sum of money for her paintings. She couldn't refuse because she needed money urgently. Afterwards, he sent her a letter of gratitude for the art he had received. Thanks to her paintings, he began to sleep better and his life became more beautiful. He supported her financially and wrote letters from time to time. The man in the cloak admitted that he had seen Ayla's paintings at this very man's, and he had come to the capital for them. Ayla did not understand how he knew A and asked him about it. He said that they were sworn enemies who had temporarily become allies due to circumstances. This man literally extorted Ayla to sell him her paintings, and when she delayed, he got very angry and began to show it in every possible way. He abruptly handed her a note with an address and asked her to promise that she would never sell her works to some crook. In the morning, Ayla discussed the situation with Selene. The girl noted that he had come such a long way to her in her paintings. This is very unusual and interesting. Ayla did not have a debut exhibition, but she already has fans. Selene also noted the beauty of Ayla's work. The Empress, feeling the girl's gaze, smiled, but her expression was clouded by thoughts of her upcoming duties. She ignored the congratulations, concentrating on her thoughts. Ayla noticed her anxiety but chose not to interfere, leaving her in the shadow of her thoughts. She didn't look happy, but rather tired or disappointed. Aiden couldn't believe that this old man was capable of anything anymore. Ayla offered to draw a bath for the Empress. Ayla knew that when the Empress was tired or nervous, she liked to take a bath. It relaxed her. Ayla felt a little nervous when Aiden chose her for this moment. It was a sign of trust, but also a responsibility. Handmaids rarely received such privileges. She tried to act reserved, but inside she was overwhelmed with emotions at this unusual turn of events. The Empress noticed the color of the rose petals in the bathtub. They were the same as Ayla's hair. She had many qualities that she liked. She was smart and secretive, looked naive, but very sensible. She was different from the other maids and people. Afterwards, Marquise asked if the girl wanted to know the reason why she hired her. Of course, Ayla was interested. Aiden told her that she had promised one person to hire her. She had taken it and thought that she would fire her after a year. But Ayla took on a job that no other person or maid would take on. The Marchioness looked at Ayla with interest and noticeable respect. Understanding the importance of her request, she readily agreed to help. Ayla felt that a new chapter of her life was opening, and she was now ready to solve the mysteries that awaited her along the way. In return, she said that Ayla would be with her until the end of her pregnancy, and even after. She needed loyal people and even more helpers. She was pregnant now, and everything was hard for her. The first Empress had already learned that she was carrying an heir. Aiden made it clear that the lady would not leave her under any circumstances. A masquerade ball was expected soon. Ayla had to find and examine the paintings in a separate room and present them to the nobility. They are poorly educated and buy the paintings simply because they are from the Eastern continent. Ayla's task was to explain the value of these works in the palace. Ayla was a little surprised by the Empress's words, but she felt relieved. Being herself and not a shadow of her father's name became a new guide for her. She began to realize that her identity did not have to be defined by her family's past alone, and that she had the right to her own name and choice. The evening garden was warm and quiet when Ayla, running through the alleys, suddenly felt that very smell. Familiar and exciting. Pictures of the past instantly popped into her memory. Laughter, conversations, moments when she was next to him. These memories brought not only warmth, but also a feeling of emptiness, because they were so distant. As if nature itself was reminding her of him, Ayla felt her heart tighten as she approached the figure. She was afraid that he wouldn't notice her, that he would pass her by, leaving her in the shadow of his thoughts. Conflicting feelings fought inside her. She wasn't ready for the meeting, but she couldn't allow herself to walk away from it completely. Trying to hide her anxiety, she quickly took a step back, convincing herself that the time had not yet come.